Did the most effective weapon of the Second World War fire a bullet, or did it wear lipstick? In the official histories, the war was won with tanks, planes, and ships. But in the shadows, another war was fought. It was a war of whispers in darkened hotel rooms, of secrets traded over glasses of champagne, of loyalty given and betrayed in the space of a heartbeat. This was the War of the Honeypot. Intelligence agencies on all sides knew a simple truth about human nature. A person will guard a state secret with their life, but they might give it away for free to someone they think they love. They trained men and women to become weapons of seduction. Their mission was to get close to the enemy, to become their confidant, their lover, and then to steal their secrets, turn their loyalties, or lead them into a trap. These agents were not just spies, they were actors playing the most dangerous role of their lives, where one missed cue or a single moment of genuine emotion could get them killed. How many critical pieces of intelligence that changed the course of battles were obtained not in an interrogation room, but in a bedroom? How did these agents manage the psychological toll of faking love, day after day, knowing that their target's life and their own was on the line? The files are still sealed on many of these operations. The names of the agents are often lost to history, but the tactics they used are a chilling look into the art of human manipulation. Number 16, what if the entire romance was a play? Imagine meeting someone. The cafe is perfect, the music is just right. You bump into them by accident, or a mutual friend introduces you. It feels like fate. Now imagine it was all a set. The cafe was chosen by an intelligence agency. The music was selected to match a psychological profile of you. The accident was rehearsed a dozen times. The mutual friend was a fellow agent. This is the stage-managed romance, the most elaborate and devious of all honeypot traps. This tactic was not about one spy seducing one target. It was about an entire team of operatives creating a false reality around the target. The goal was to make the manufactured romance feel so authentic, so destined, that the target would never question it. The agent playing the lover was just the lead actor. There was a supporting cast, the friendly bartender who always seemed to give good advice, the grumpy landlord who created a shared problem for the couple to solve, the street musician whose songs seemed to tell their story. All of them were on the payroll of an intelligence service. This level of operational complexity was a hallmark of agencies with significant resources and a flair for psychological warfare like the German Sicherheitsdienst SD or the Soviet Nkvd. They understood that context is everything. An affair that begins in a controlled environment is an affair they can control from start to finish. For example, a targeted diplomat might be moved to a new apartment. The agency would ensure that the charming art dealer living next door was in fact one of their agents. They would orchestrate chance meetings in the hallway at the local market during an air raid drill. They would manufacture shared experiences to build a foundation of trust before the seduction even began. The research that went into these operations was immense. They would build a complete file on the target. What were their hobbies? Their favorite foods, their political leanings, what were their vulnerabilities? Were they lonely, egotistical? Did they have a weakness for a particular type of person? This information, gathered through surveillance and informants, was used to write the script for the romance. The agent would then be trained to become the target's perfect partner. A 1943 OSS training manual, which is now declassified, stressed the importance of assuming a personality and character which will be congenial to the subject. It was a cold, calculated process of becoming someone's soulmate for the purpose of national security. The cost and manpower were staggering. An operation like this could involve a dozen agents, multiple safe houses, and a budget equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars today. But the potential payoff was worth it. A well-placed target, like a military attaché with access to invasion plans or an embassy cipher clerk, could provide intelligence that would save thousands of lives or turn the tide of a campaign. The Allied efforts to mislead the Axis powers about the D-Day landings, known as Operation Bodyguard, involved creating a vast web of deception. While not exclusively romantic, it shows the scale at which they were willing to construct false realities to fool the enemy. The stage-managed romance is just a miniaturized, deeply personal version of that same strategy. But what happens when the actor starts to believe their own lines? The psychological pressure on the agent was immense. They lived a lie 24 hours a day. They had to show affection they did not feel and suppress any genuine feelings that might arise. A moment of hesitation, a slip of the tongue, could unravel the entire operation. The constant fear of discovery was a heavy burden. And sometimes the lines blurred. The agent, tasked with faking love, might find themselves genuinely caring for the person they were assigned to betray. This was the ultimate danger, not just for the mission, but for the agent's own sanity. We know these operations happened, but the successful ones are, by their nature, the ones we are least likely to know about. They remain hidden in redacted government files. It is terrifying. How many high-level officials fell for a romance where every single person they met, from the lover to the taxi driver, was an enemy agent? Are there classified files detailing entire Truman Show-style deceptions that we will never see? Could a target's best friend who introduced them to their new love have been the operations mastermind all along? And how many agents lost their minds, trapped between the role they were playing and the person they used to be? Number 15. Could kindness be the cruelest weapon? We think of honeypots as being about sex and glamour, but one of the most effective tactics had nothing to do with seduction in the traditional sense. It was about weaponizing kindness. This was the care package trap. The target was not a powerful general or a suave diplomat. The target was often a lonely, overworked, and stressed individual in a position of trust. A secretary, a radio operator, a mid-level bureaucrat. Someone who was overlooked and unappreciated. The agent's job was to become their friend, their only friend. They would not make a romantic move at first. Instead, they would offer a shoulder to cry on. They would bring them a hot meal when they were working late. They would listen to their complaints about their boss. They would remember their birthday when everyone else forgot. They would offer small, practical kindnesses that slowly broke down the target's emotional defenses. This tactic was particularly effective in the harsh environments of wartime Europe. In cities under rationing and blackout, a small gift of real coffee, a pair of silk stockings, or a bar of chocolate was not just a luxury, it was a profound gesture of care. The Special Operations Executive SOE, the British agency tasked with sabotage and subversion behind enemy lines, trained its agents to build networks of trust. Their survival depended on the loyalty of ordinary people. They understood that loyalty could be bought, not just with money, but with compassion. An agent providing medicine for a sick child could gain the undying loyalty of a French railway worker, who would then report on German troop movements. The care package trap applied this principle to espionage. An agent would identify a target who felt isolated. For example, a cipher clerk at a neutral embassy in Lisbon or Stockholm. These were high-pressure jobs filled with paranoia. The agent would approach not as a potential lover, but as a sympathetic ear. They would create a safe space for the target to vent their frustrations. Over weeks or months, a deep bond of friendship would be forged. The target would come to rely on the agent for emotional support. The psychologist Abraham Maslow proposed his hierarchy of needs in the early 1940s. While not directly applied by spy agencies at the time, the principle is the same. These agencies intuitively understood that if you could fulfill a person's fundamental need for belonging and esteem, you could gain incredible influence over them. The care package agent was fulfilling those needs for the target. Only after this deep trust was established would the agent make their move. It would be a small request. My cousin needs to get a message to his family across the border. Could you just tell me if any unusual travel restrictions are coming up? Or, I'm worried about a friend. Their name is on a list. Could you see if that list is on your boss's desk? The request was framed as a personal favor, a way for the target to help the one person in the world who seemed to care about them. Because of the emotional debt, the target would find it incredibly difficult to refuse. What started as a small favor would escalate. The agent would ask for more and more sensitive information, always framing it as a personal need. The target, already compromised, would be trapped. They were not betraying their country for money or ideology. They were doing it for their friend. This made the betrayal feel less like treason and more like an act of loyalty to the one person who had shown them kindness. This tactic was insidious because it preyed on the best parts of human nature, our capacity for friendship, trust, and gratitude. It turned these virtues into vulnerabilities. The agent had to be a master of emotional manipulation, able to project genuine warmth and sympathy while remaining cold and detached on the inside. It was a draining and morally corrosive role to play. The records of these operations are sparse. They were not dramatic affairs that ended in shootouts. They were quiet, slow-burning betrayals that unfolded over cups of tea and whispered conversations. So, what are the questions that remain? How many people in history have been branded as traitors when, in reality, they were just lonely souls manipulated by a false friend? Did any of the agents using this tactic ever break down and confess, unable to bear the guilt of betraying someone's genuine trust? And could this tactic have been used not just on individuals, but on entire communities, with agents infiltrating resistance groups by becoming their most trusted and helpful members, only to betray them all in the end? Number 14, what if? The seduction was only a means to an end. Not every honeypot operation was about stealing secrets. Sometimes the goal was much simpler and much more brutal elimination. This was the trap of ideological seduction, where the romance was merely the delivery mechanism for a political conversion or a deadly endgame. The agent was not just a spy, they were a recruiter or an assassin in disguise. This tactic was a favorite of ideologically driven intelligence services such as the Soviet NKVD. They believed that appealing to a target's political sympathies could be even more powerful than appealing to their libido. The agent's mission was to find a target who is already disillusioned with their own government or sympathetic to the agent's cause. This could be an intellectual, a journalist, a scientist, or a military officer who felt their country was on the wrong side of history. The agent would approach the target not as a potential lover, but as a fellow believer. They would engage in long conversations about politics, philosophy, and the future of the world. They would present their ideology as the only logical and moral choice. The romance that developed from these conversations felt organic and profound. It was not just a physical attraction, it was a meeting of minds, a shared passion for a cause. The target believed they had found their soulmate, someone who finally understood them. One of the most famous examples of this, though it began before the war, was the recruitment of the Cambridge 5 spy ring by Soviet agents. Men like Anthony Blunt and Kim Philby were not seduced by glamorous women in the traditional sense. They were seduced by an idea presented to them by charismatic and intelligent handlers who nurtured their ideological convictions. The personal relationships they formed with their recruiters solidified their commitment to the Soviet cause. This model of ideological seduction was refined and deployed throughout the war. The agent would use the emotional and intellectual intimacy of the relationship to draw the target deeper into their world. They would be invited to secret meetings, introduced to other like-minded individuals who were also agents, and given books and pamphlets to read. The target was slowly isolated from their old life and friends, and their entire worldview was reshaped. They were being radicalized under the guise of falling in love. Once the target was fully committed to the ideology, the real mission would begin. They would be asked to provide information, not for a foreign government, but for the cause. They were not a traitor, they were a revolutionary. This reframing was a powerful psychological tool that allowed the target to justify their actions, but sometimes the goal was not recruitment. It was assassination. An agent would get close to a high-ranking enemy official, becoming their trusted lover or mistress. Their mission was not to gather intelligence, but to wait for the perfect moment to strike. This could involve poison, a hidden blade, or even a small explosive device. The Japanese agent Yoshiko Kawashima, known as the Eastern Jewel, was a master of this kind of work. A princess by birth, she used her connections and charisma to get close to powerful figures in Chinese politics and military circles. She was both a seductress and a ruthless operative, implicated in numerous plots and assassinations. Her story, though shrouded in legend, illustrates the deadly potential of this tactic. The agent in this role had to be a true fanatic, willing to die for their cause. They were often considered expendable by their own agencies. Theirs was a one-way mission. The psychological profile required was that of someone with absolute ideological conviction and nerves of steel. So they had to maintain the charade of love and affection for months, all while planning the murder of the person sleeping next to them. The historical record is filled with assassinations of political and military leaders, but the role that romantic entanglement played is often deliberately obscured. These operations were the most deeply guarded secrets of all. This leaves us with some chilling questions. How many political assassinations in history were carried out not by a sniper's bullet, but by a lover's betrayal? Were there agents who, at the last moment, could not go through with the killing, having developed real feelings for their target? And how many agents were eliminated by their own side after a successful mission to ensure the secret of the honeypot died with them? Number 13, what if you were blackmailed for a love that never existed? This is perhaps the most cynical and coercive of all honeypot tactics. It is the classic blackmail trap, or what would later be known by the Russian term kompromat. The goal was not to win the target's heart or mind. The goal was to manufacture a compromising situation and then use it as leverage. The romance was nothing more than a carefully documented performance. The setup was brutally efficient. First, an intelligence agency would identify a target with a critical vulnerability. This was often a high-ranking official who was married, had a public reputation to protect, or belonged to a culture where adultery was a career-ending scandal. The key was that the target had something significant to lose. Next, the agency would deploy a honeypot agent specifically chosen to appeal to the target's known type. The agent's job was to engineer a brief, intense affair. This was not a long-term seduction, it was a tactical strike. The entire encounter would be secretly photographed or filmed. The hotel room would be bugged, the love letters would be copied. The agency needed undeniable proof of the indiscretion. The Hotel Ritz in Paris, the Para Palace in Istanbul, and grand hotels in neutral Lisbon were notorious hotspots for this kind of activity during the war. These were places where diplomats, military officers, and businessmen mingled, and where intelligence agencies from all sides had eyes and ears. An agent might accidentally spill a drink on a target in the hotel bar, leading to an apology, a conversation, and an invitation to dinner. Within 48 hours, the trap would be sprung and sealed. Once the evidence was secured, the romance would end abruptly. The agent would disappear. A few days or weeks later, the target would be approached by a different operative, a handler. They would be presented with the evidence, the photographs, the recordings, the letters, and then the demand would be made. We have these. They could be sent to your wife, to your commanding officer, to the newspapers, or you could cooperate with us. The target was faced with a devastating choice: ruin their career and personal life, or become a spy for a foreign power. Most chose to cooperate. They were not motivated by ideology, money, or love. They were motivated by fear and shame. This made them a reliable, if unwilling, asset. They would provide secrets, not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. This tactic was particularly effective against military officers from socially conservative backgrounds. The British Secret Intelligence Service MI6 and the American Office of Strategic Services OSS were well aware of the power of sexual blackmail. In fact, a significant part of their counterintelligence work involved identifying which of their own personnel were vulnerable to such traps and trying to protect them. They knew their enemies were using these methods because they were using them too. The book The Irregulars, Roald Dahl, and the British Spy Ring in Wartime Washington by Janet Conroy details how British agents used social connections and romantic intrigue to influence American politics and gather intelligence before the U.S. entered the war. This often involved creating situations that, if revealed, could cause embarrassment. The agent who played the role of the lover in a blackmail trap had to be emotionally resilient. Their job was to simulate passion and intimacy, knowing it was a prelude to destroying the target's life. They were a performer and a predator. There was no room for empathy. The legacy of these operations is a trail of broken lives. The targets were trapped, forced to betray their country for years, living in constant fear of exposure. Many of these traitors were, in fact, victims. When their spying was eventually discovered by their own side, they could not admit the real reason for their actions without bringing about the very disgrace they had tried so hard to avoid. So they often went to prison or faced execution, their secret shame dying with them. The questions that linger are haunting. How many so-called traitors of the war were actually victims of sophisticated blackmail schemes? Are there still families today who believe their ancestor was a villain without knowing the impossible choice they were forced to make? And how many honeypot agents suffered from the psychological trauma of being professional life wreckers, using intimacy as a weapon to break people? Did any of them ever try to go back and undo the damage they had caused? Number 12. Can you turn a target by seducing their spouse? Why go through the difficulty of seducing a well-guarded, high-level target when you can get to them through the person they trust the most? This was the logic behind the indirect honeypot, a tactic of seducing the husband, wife, or lover of the actual target. It was a cruel and sophisticated bank shot. The primary target was, for example, a senior government minister or a scientist working on a top-secret project. They were trained in counterintelligence, aware of the dangers of honey traps, and closely monitored. A direct approach would be too risky, but their spouse might be a civilian, untrained, and perhaps feeling neglected or lonely due to the pressures of their partner's important work. This was the vulnerability. An intelligence agency would deploy an agent to get close to the spouse. The agent, a man or a woman, would be a master of charm and sympathy. They would happen to share the same hobby as the spouse, or their children would happen to attend the same school. They would build a friendship, offering an escape from the spouse's often stressful and secretive life. The agent would be the one person they could talk to, the one who paid them attention. Eventually, this friendship would blossom into an affair. The agent now had a direct line into the target's home. The goal was not always to turn the spouse into an active spy. Often, they were an unwitting source of intelligence. Through pillow talk and casual conversation, the spouse would reveal details about the primary target's work, their moods, their schedule, and the stresses they were under. This information was pure gold for an intelligence agency. It could reveal when the target was feeling vulnerable, what projects were causing them anxiety, or when they would be traveling. This could be used to plan a bugging operation, a document theft, or even an assassination. Amy Thorpe-Pack, an American spy working for the British, was a master of this kind of operation. Codenamed Cynthia, she operated in Washington, D.C. She was beautiful, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. One of her most famous exploits involved seducing an attaché at the Vichy French embassy to get her hands on their naval ciphers. She managed to not only become his lover, but to convince him to let her borrow the codebooks. She and a safecracker accomplice then let themselves into the embassy at night while she kept the guard occupied. The intelligence she gathered was critical to the Allied invasion of North Africa in 1942. While she often targeted officials directly, her methods show the power of using romantic entanglement to gain physical access to secure locations. Seducing a spouse could achieve the same result. The spouse could unwittingly provide keys, security codes, or a layout of the house. In a more aggressive version of this tactic, the agency would use the affair to blackmail the spouse. They would threaten to reveal the affair to the primary target, causing a public scandal and ruining their career. The spouse would then be forced to actively spy on their own partner. They would be instructed to open safes, photograph documents, or plant listening devices in their own home. This turned the family home, a place of supposed safety and trust, into an operational theater of the secret war. The psychological damage of this tactic was immense. It destroyed marriages, families, and lives. The spouse was trapped in a web of deceit, betraying the person they loved to protect themselves from exposure. The primary target, meanwhile, was being betrayed in their own bed, completely unaware that their partner had been turned against them. This tactic reveals the absolute ruthlessness of intelligence agencies during the war. They were willing to weaponize the most intimate human relationships and shatter families to gain an advantage. No one was off limits. Everyone was a potential target or a potential tool. The unknowns are deeply personal. How many wartime marriages that ended in divorce were actually the result of a successful intelligence operation? Did any spouses turned into spies against their partners ever confess what they had done? And what was the fate of the agents who carried out these missions? Could they ever have a normal family life of their own after using love and marriage as instruments of betrayal? Number 11 was the damsel in distress, the most dangerous woman in the room. It is one of the oldest stories in the book. A beautiful, vulnerable woman is in trouble. A powerful man, driven by a protective instinct, comes to her rescue. He feels strong, chivalrous, and in control. What he does not realize is that she is not a damsel. She is a hunter, and he is her prey. The damsel in distress was one of the most effective and frequently used honeypot tactics of the war. This tactic worked by playing on traditional gender roles and male ego. The agent would present herself as helpless and in need of protection. She might be a refugee who had lost everything, an artist struggling to survive, or a performer being harassed by a powerful official. She would create a situation where the target, a military officer, a diplomat, or an intelligence officer, could be her hero. Christine Granville, the Polish-born agent for the British SOE, real name Christina Skarbek, was a legend in her own time. While not strictly a honeypot in the traditional sense, she was a master of using her charisma and perceived vulnerability to manipulate the enemy. On one famous occasion in France, she walked into a Gestapo headquarters and demanded the release of two of her male colleagues who were scheduled for execution. She claimed to be the niece of a British general and threatened the local commander with terrible reprisals after the imminent Allied victory if he did not cooperate. Her sheer audacity and cool nerve, combined with her beauty and charm, convinced the officer to release the prisoners. She played a role, and the enemy believed it. The damsel in distress tactic was a carefully crafted performance. The agent would study her target and identify his specific psychological triggers. Did he see himself as a romantic hero, a protector of the weak, a man who could fix things? She would then tailor her distress to appeal directly to that part of his personality. The trap often began with a chance meeting where the agent was visibly upset or in some kind of trouble. The target would intervene. She would be eternally grateful. She would tell him a tragic and entirely fabricated backstory. He would feel compelled to help her further. He might offer her money, a place to stay, or use his official position to solve her problems. Once the target was emotionally invested in her rescue, he was hooked. She would slowly become dependent on him, making him feel essential to her survival. This created a powerful emotional bond. In his eyes, she was not a threat, she was a victim he was protecting. This allowed her to get past his professional guard. He would talk to her about his work, seeking her sympathy and admiration, and she would listen, all the while gathering intelligence. This tactic was devastatingly effective because it disarmed the target's suspicion. Men in positions of power were often trained to look for femme fatales, for confident and glamorous women who might be spies. They were not trained to look for the weeping refugee or the frightened secretary. The agent was hiding in plain sight, her vulnerability her greatest camouflage. The endgame could vary. Sometimes the goal was simple intelligence gathering. The damsel would be a listening post at the heart of the enemy's power structure. In other cases, she would use her influence over the target to get him to make specific decisions, to leak false information, or to reveal the names of other agents. And in the most ruthless scenarios, her distress was a lure to draw the target into an ambush or an assassination. The questions that this tactic leaves behind are unsettling. How many acts of chivalry by powerful men during the war were actually them walking straight into a trap? Were there entire spy networks that operated under the cover of being refugee aid organizations or social clubs for displaced persons? And what happened to the male agents who tried to use a man-in-distress version of this tactic? Was it as effective, or did it fail because it ran counter to the expected social scripts of the time? Number 10, how do you seduce someone who hates you? The most challenging target for a honeypot is not someone who is susceptible to charm, but someone who is ideologically opposed to you. How do you seduce a committed enemy, a man who sees you and your country as the embodiment of evil? The answer is the forbidden fruit tactic. This was a high-risk, high-reward strategy that played on a deep and dangerous human psychological quirk. We are often drawn to what we are not supposed to have. The agent in this scenario would not hide their identity. In fact, they would flaunt it. She might be a German singer in a London nightclub known to be frequented by British officers, or a Russian ballerina in Paris with known connections to the Soviet embassy. Her allegiance was an open secret. This made her both dangerous and alluring. The tactic worked by creating an atmosphere of thrilling transgression. The target, an officer or official from the opposing side, would be drawn to the agent precisely because she was the enemy. An affair with her was not just a romantic dalliance, it was an act of rebellion, a walk on the wild side. It broke the monotony and the rigid discipline of wartime life. It was a secret that set him apart from his peers. This created an intense, almost addictive bond. The secrecy and the shared danger of their relationship fostered a powerful us-against-the-world mentality. The agent would play on this, telling the target that he was the only one who truly understood her, that their connection transcended the petty politics of their governance. She would frame their affair not as treason, but as a testament to their superior independent minds. A key element of this tactic was intellectual flattery. The agent would praise the target's open-mindedness and courage. Most of your countrymen would just see my uniform, she might say, but you see the person. You are not a mindless patriot. This appealed to the target's ego and made him feel sophisticated and worldly. This was a long game. The agent would not ask for secrets immediately. That would break the spell. Instead, she would build a relationship based on this shared sense of intellectual and emotional superiority. Over time, she would begin to subtly probe for information, always framing it in the context of their personal relationship. I worry about you, she might say. There are rumors of a big offensive coming. I just want to know you'll be safe. The target, wanting to reassure his lover and prove his importance, might let a crucial detail slip. This tactic required an agent of incredible skill and nerve. She had to be a convincing ideological representative of her country, but also able to project an air of being above it all. She had to walk a tightrope, being the enemy enough to be exciting, but not so much as to be terrifying. She was selling the ultimate fantasy, a love so powerful it could overcome war itself. The German intelligence service, the Abwehr, attempted to use variations of this tactic, placing attractive agents in neutral capitals like Madrid and Lisbon. Their job was to mingle with allied diplomats and military personnel, using their enemy status as a perverse kind of calling card. The book Agent Zigzag by Ben McIntyre about the double agent Eddie Chapman illustrates the complex psychological games played between opposing intelligence services, where loyalties were constantly tested and personal relationships were always suspect. The forbidden fruit tactic was a psychological masterclass in manipulation. It turned a target's patriotism into a weakness, using his hatred of the enemy as the very bait for the trap. But what do we still not know? How many wartime affairs between enemies were genuine love stories, and how many were carefully orchestrated intelligence operations? Did any agent, tasked with playing the charming enemy, ever find their own loyalties wavering after forming a deep bond with their target? And what happened when these affairs were discovered? Were the targets executed as traitors, or were they quietly disappeared to avoid a public scandal that would admit such a security breach was even possible? Number 9. What if the spy's best weapon was a good book? Not all seduction is physical. For a certain type of target, the most powerful aphrodisiac is intelligence. The intellectual equal tactic was designed for these targets: the academics, the scientists, the strategists, and the codebreakers. These were people who were often immune to conventional charms. They were not interested in shallow beauty. They were interested in a meeting of minds. The agent deployed for this mission was not necessarily the most glamorous, but they were always the most intelligent. They had to be a genuine intellectual peer to the target. They would be given a crash course in the target's field of expertise, whether it was quantum physics, ancient history, or naval engineering. They had to be able to hold their own in a conversation, to challenge the target's ideas, and to earn their respect. The seduction would begin not in a bar, but in a library, a university, or at a lecture. The agent would happen to be reading a book the target admired, or they would ask an insightful question that caught the target's attention. They would create an impression of shared intellectual passion. For a target who spent their life feeling misunderstood by a world that did not appreciate their work, finding someone who finally got it was a profoundly intimate experience. The relationship would be built on a foundation of ideas. They would spend hours debating, sharing theories, and working on intellectual problems together. The romance that grew out of this felt pure and authentic to the target. It was a partnership of equals. This was the trap. The agent was not a partner. They were a sponge, soaking up every piece of information the target revealed. The scientists working on the Allied atomic bomb project were considered prime targets for this kind of operation. They were brilliant, but often socially isolated and living under immense pressure. An agent who could talk to them about theoretical physics, who could understand the moral and intellectual weight of their work, would have been an incredibly effective tool. The Soviet intelligence services were particularly adept at this, as they placed a high value on scientific and technical intelligence. The case of Klaus Fuchs, a German-born physicist who spied for the Soviets while working on the bomb project at Los Alamos, shows how ideological conviction combined with intellectual connection could lead a brilliant mind to treason. While not a classic honeypot, the principle of using intellectual rapport to gain trust was central to his betrayal. The agent's greatest weapon was their ability to listen. They would praise the target's brilliance, making them feel seen and appreciated in a way they never had before. In this safe space, the target would let their guard down. They might complain about a bureaucratic obstacle in their project, revealing a key administrative weakness. They might brainstorm a solution to a technical problem out loud, revealing a critical piece of the puzzle. They were not giving away secrets, they were just thinking out loud with the one person in the world who understood them. This tactic was subtle and patient. It could take months or even years to fully cultivate the target. But the payoff could be immense. A single formula, a blueprint, or a strategic concept stolen from the mind of a genius could change the course of the war. The agent in this role had to be a brilliant actor with a formidable memory. They had to absorb complex information and relay it accurately to their handlers, all without arousing suspicion. They were living a double life of the mind, maintaining their cover story while running a parallel track of espionage in their head. The questions this tactic leaves are fascinating. How many scientific breakthroughs or strategic innovations during the war were stolen, not from a safe, but from a conversation between two lovers over a chessboard? Were there agents who became so engrossed in their intellectual role that they made genuine contributions to the target's work, becoming a collaborator and a spy at the same time? And did any target ever become suspicious, not because of a security slip, but because their soulmate seemed just a little too perfect, a little too interested in their work? Number 8. How could a spy turn a whole city into a weapon? A single honeypot agent is a threat. A network of them, all working together, can turn an entire social scene into a hunting ground. This was the gossip gatherer tactic. It was less about a single intense seduction and more about using a web of low-level romantic and social entanglements to gather a vast mosaic of intelligence. This tactic thrived in the neutral capitals of the war: Lisbon, Stockholm, Madrid, Istanbul. These cities were crawling with spies, diplomats, journalists, businessmen, and refugees from all sides. The social life was a dizzying whirl of embassy parties, nightclub rendezvous, and hotel bar gossip. An intelligence agency would deploy not one agent, but a team. This team might consist of nightclub singers, dancers, waiters, hairdressers, and society hostesses. Their job was to become the social hub of the city. The lead agent might be a charismatic woman who ran the most popular salon or nightclub in the city. Her job was to be everyone's friend and confidante. She would use her charm and connections to attract the powerful and the influential. The other agents in her network would work for her or circulate in her orbit. A dancer might have a brief affair with a junior naval attaché. A hairdresser might listen to the gossip from embassy wives. A bartender would overhear conversations between military contractors. No single piece of information they gathered was a war-winning secret. The dancer might learn that a certain fleet was on shore leave. The hairdresser might learn that a diplomat's wife was unhappy because her husband was working late on a big project. The bartender might hear a salesman complain about a shortage of a specific industrial component. Individually, these pieces of information were meaningless. But they were all funneled back to a central analyst. This analyst, like a detective, would piece together the mosaic. The fleet on shore leave combined with the diplomat working late on a big project, and the shortage of a specific component might point to one thing: preparations for a major naval operation. The gossip was transformed into hard intelligence. The romantic entanglements in this model were often fleeting and casual. The agents were not trying to build long-term relationships. They were social butterflies, flitting from person to person, gathering pollen. They used flirtation and the promise of intimacy as a tool to get people to relax and talk. A lonely junior officer, flattered by the attention of a beautiful singer, would be more likely to boast about his upcoming mission than he would in a formal interrogation. The American jazz singer Josephine Baker, who worked for the French Resistance, is a prime example of a social hub being used for intelligence. During her performances in neutral countries, she mingled with everyone from German officials to Japanese diplomats. She would scribble notes on her sheet music about conversations she overheard. Her celebrity and charm gave her access to circles that a traditional spy could never penetrate. She was the queen of a network of whispers. This tactic was incredibly difficult to counter. There was no single spy to identify and arrest. It was a decentralized, almost organic intelligence gathering operation that was woven into the very fabric of the city's social life. Trying to shut it down would be like trying to stop people from gossiping. The agents involved were often not highly trained professionals. They were ordinary people with a valuable skill. They were good with people. They were recruited for their social access and their ability to make people talk. For many, it was a dangerous and exciting way to contribute to the war effort. The lingering questions are about scale and impact. How much of the intelligence that shaped the war was not stolen by master spies, but simply gathered from the loose talk at parties and in nightclubs? Were entire military campaigns compromised because a junior officer was trying to impress a dancer? And how many of the great socialites and party hosts of the era were secretly running these networks, their glamour and charm a cover for a deadly serious game of espionage? Number 7 was pillow talk, the most effective form of interrogation. Why use threats and torture when a whisper in the dark can be so much more effective? The pillow talk tactic is the essence of the honeypot. It is the simple, direct extraction of secrets from a target who has been made to fall in love, or at least lust, with an agent. It is interrogation by intimacy. This tactic relies on a fundamental human vulnerability. After a moment of physical intimacy, people are often at their most relaxed and emotionally open. Their professional guard is down. They are not thinking about national security. They are thinking about the person lying next to them. This is the moment the agent has been waiting for. The agent's approach would be subtle and indirect. They would not ask, "What are the coordinates of the new radar installation?" Instead, they would use emotionally charged, seemingly innocent questions. You seem so stressed lately. Is it that project at work? You work so hard, my love. I worry about you. Or, "You're traveling again soon, aren't you? I'll miss you so much. I wish I knew where you were going just so I could picture you there." The target, wanting to unburden themselves or wanting to impress their lover with their importance, would often reveal critical information without even realizing it. They might complain about a security flaw in their office or boast about being one of the few people who knows the date of a coming offensive. They were not revealing secrets to a spy. They were sharing their life with their partner. This required the agent to be a superb actor and a patient psychologist. They had to create an atmosphere of absolute trust and intimacy. They had to know exactly how to phrase a question to get the information they needed without raising suspicion. They had to be able to read the target's moods and know when to push and when to pull back. One of the most effective practitioners of this was the Japanese spy Sumi Kawakami. Operating in the United States, before the war, she posed as a journalist and socialite. She was known for her intelligence and charm, and she cultivated relationships with a number of influential American men. Her specialty was getting them to talk about their work in what they believed were casual, private conversations. She gathered a wealth of information on American naval capabilities and industrial production, which was passed back to Tokyo. The information gathered through pillow talk was often of the highest quality. It came directly from the source. A document can be forged, a radio signal can be faked, but the words whispered by a key planner in a moment of unguarded intimacy are as close to the truth as a spy can get. The Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park famously broke the German Enigma code, a monumental technical achievement. But intelligence agencies still needed to know what the Germans were thinking, what their morale was like, what their intentions were. This kind of soft intelligence, the human element, was what pillow talk could provide. The psychological toll on the agent could be severe. It required a level of emotional detachment that was difficult to maintain. They were sharing the most intimate moments with a person they were planning to betray. They had to feign love and passion night after night while their mind was cold and focused on the mission. It was a profoundly isolating and corrupting experience. This raw, direct form of espionage leaves us with some of the most basic and disturbing questions. How many of the war's greatest secrets were given away in a moment of post-coital carelessness? Did any agent ever fail in their mission because they were so repulsed by their target that they could not maintain the physical intimacy required? And conversely, how many agents broke the cardinal rule and fell in love with their targets? And what happened to them when their handlers found out? Were they retired, or were they forced to complete the mission, betraying the one person they had come to genuinely care for? Number 6. What if your rescuer was your captor? Imagine you are a downed Allied pilot, a captured spy, or a political prisoner in a camp. You are interrogated, threatened, and maybe even tortured. You resist, you hold on to your loyalty. Then, one day, a sympathetic guard, a kindly nurse, or a fellow prisoner offers you a small kindness. They smuggle you food, they treat your wounds, they whisper words of encouragement. You form a bond, a secret alliance in a world of brutality. You begin to trust them. You even begin to fall for them. Then, they offer you a chance to escape. This is the false rescuer or love and let go tactic. This was a cruel and sophisticated psychological operation. The rescuer, the guard, the nurse, the fellow prisoner was not a friend. They were an agent of the enemy's intelligence service. The entire rescue was a staged event. The goal was to win the target's absolute trust and gratitude by saving their life. The German intelligence services were known to use this tactic against captured Allied agents. An SOE or OSS agent would be captured and subjected to harsh interrogation by one team. Then, a different team, the soft team, would take over. One of their members would play the role of a dissident, someone who secretly hated their own regime and wanted to help the Allies. This agent would help the captured spy escape. The escape itself would be a masterpiece of stage management. It would be challenging enough to be believable with fake close calls and manufactured dangers. You know, the captured agent and their rescuer would go on the run together, relying on each other for survival. During this time, a deep bond would be forged. The captured agent, full of gratitude and relief, would see their rescuer as a hero. Once they reached a safe location, which was, in fact, an enemy-controlled safe house, the debriefing would begin. The rescued agent would be asked to provide information to help their rescuer and the supposed resistance network. What were their mission objectives? Who were their contacts? What were their communication codes? Eager to help the person who saved their life and believing they were now among friends, the agent would tell them everything. They would unwittingly compromise their entire network. Once all the useful information had been extracted, the trap would close. The rescuer would reveal their true identity. The captured agent would realize they had not escaped at all. They had been manipulated into betraying their comrades. The psychological devastation of this moment was often enough to break even the most hardened operative. At this point, they could be turned into a double agent, forced to send false messages back to their own side under the enemy's control. This was known in German intelligence circles as the Funkspiel, or radio game. The story of the Dutch agent Peter Tazelaar, who worked for the SOE, has elements of this kind of deception, although he was on the Allied side. His daring escapes and infiltrations show the high-stakes world of capture and evasion, where trust was the most valuable and most easily exploited currency. The enemy's use of the false rescuer was a mirror image of these heroic tales, a darkened version of the escape and evasion narrative. This tactic was not just about intelligence, it was about psychological warfare. It was designed to destroy an agent's morale, to make them question their own judgment, and to sow paranoia and distrust within Allied intelligence services. If you could not trust the person who saved your life, who could you trust? The questions that remain from these operations are chilling. How many resistance networks were rolled up because a captured agent was fooled by a staged escape? Are there stories of heroic escapes in the official histories that were, in fact, enemy intelligence operations from start to finish? And did a rescue agent ever have a change of heart, genuinely helping their target escape after forming a real bond with them on the run? If they did, what fate awaited them at the hands of their own ruthless masters? Number 5, could a fake marriage be a perfect cover? A lone agent, a single man or woman operating under a false identity, is always under suspicion. They have no family, no history, no social ties. They are a blank slate, and in the world of counterespionage, blank slates are a red flag. What was the solution? The cover marriage. 2 agents who might be complete strangers would be ordered to pose as a married couple. Their mission was to build a life together, to become a normal, unremarkable part of a community, all while secretly conducting espionage. This was a long-term infiltration strategy. The couple would move into a new city or country, often years before a conflict was expected to break out. They would get jobs, buy a house, make friends with the neighbors, and maybe even have children who would be raised completely unaware of their parents' true identities. They had to be the perfect, boring, suburban family. Their cover was their normality. This tactic was a staple of Soviet intelligence, who referred to these deep cover agents as illegals. They would be given meticulously crafted backstories, or legends, often based on the identities of real people who had died. They would spend years living their cover before they were ever activated for a mission. The marriage between the 2 agents was purely a professional arrangement, but it was the most demanding acting job imaginable. They had to live together, share a bed, and present a convincing picture of domestic bliss to the outside world 24 hours a day for years on end. They had to remember every detail of their shared history, how they met, where they went on their honeymoon, the names of their non-existent relatives. A single slip-up, a moment of inconsistency could unravel their entire cover. The psychological pressure was immense. The agents had to suppress their own personalities and live their assigned roles. They had no one to confide in except each other, but even that relationship was fraught with professional distance. What happens when real feelings develop? An agent might fall in love with their partner, but they could never be sure if their partner's affection was genuine or just part of the act. Jealousy, resentment, and loneliness were constant dangers that could compromise the mission. When activated, the couple would use their established social network and their unremarkable status to gather intelligence. The husband might work in a factory with military contracts, gathering technical information. The wife might join a local women's group with the wives of government officials, gathering political gossip. They would use dead drops and secret radio transmissions to send their information back to their handlers. They were a self-contained intelligence cell hidden in plain sight. The story of the Portland spy ring in Britain, though exposed in the Cold War, has its roots in this WWII-era methodology. That ring included a married couple, Peter and Helen Kroger, whose real names were Morris and Lona Cohen, who posed as antiquarian booksellers in a London suburb while acting as a communication hub for a Soviet spy at a naval research facility. Their case revealed to the public the shocking reality of how deep these cover stories could go. The covert marriage was the ultimate long con. It required incredible patience, discipline, and a complete sacrifice of personal identity. The agents who undertook these missions were essentially erased from their own lives and reborn as someone else. The unanswered questions are about the human cost. How many of these fake marriages became real? and did that strengthen or weaken the operation? What happened when one partner wanted to quit, but the other did not? Were children ever used unwittingly as part of the cover, their innocent friendships with the children of targets exploited for intelligence? And how many ordinary families that we read about in history were actually sleeper cells, waiting for a signal to begin their secret war? Number 4. What if a kiss was literally poison? The femme fatale is a classic archetype of espionage, but usually her weapon is betrayal. In the darkest corners of the secret war, this was taken to a grimly literal conclusion. The poison kiss was not a metaphor. It was a method of assassination where the agent was the delivery system for a deadly toxin. This was a tactic of last resort, used against high-value targets who were too well guarded for a conventional attack. The agent, almost always a woman, would have to get closer to the target than any assassin with a gun or a knife ever could. She had to get into his personal space, his arms, his bed. There were several ways this could be accomplished. One method involved the agent applying a fast-acting contact poison to her lips. The poison would have to be potent enough to kill with a single touch, and it would be absorbed through the thin skin of the target's lips or mucous membranes. The agent herself would have to have taken an antidote beforehand, or have applied a protective, invisible barrier to her own lips to avoid poisoning herself. This was incredibly high risk, a smudged application, a flawed antidote, and the agent would die along with her target. Another method involved a poison that could be ingested. The agent might share a drink with the target, her own glass being clean while his was secretly coated with a tasteless, odorless poison. Or she might administer the poison in a more intimate way, a final deadly act in what the target believed was a moment of passion. This was a suicide mission in all but name. Even if the agent survived the act of poisoning, her escape was highly unlikely. She would be the last person seen with the victim. Her face would be known, she was considered an expendable asset, a human weapon to be deployed and then discarded. The agencies that used such methods, like the more ruthless sections of the German SD or the Soviet Nkvd's special operations units, saw their agents as tools, not people. The historical record on this is, for obvious reasons, incredibly thin. These were not operations that were written down in official reports. They exist in the realm of rumor, legend, and heavily redacted intelligence files. However, the science was there. The 1940s saw significant developments in chemical and biological agents. Both Allied and Axis powers had secret weapons programs exploring all manner of exotic poisons for assassination. The OSS famously developed a range of assassination tools, including explosive cigars and pills that could induce heart attacks. It is not a great leap to imagine these poisons being adapted for use in a honeypot scenario. The agent chosen for such a mission would have to be someone with a unique psychological profile. They would need to be driven by fanaticism, a desire for revenge, or a complete lack of fear. They had to be capable of showing warmth and affection to a person they were about to kill in the most intimate way possible. It is the absolute perversion of a human act of love into an act of cold-blooded murder. The very idea of the poison kiss has a morbid fascination, which is why it has become a staple of spy fiction. But its real-world application, however rare, represents the moral abyss into which the secret war sometimes descended. The questions it leaves are the stuff of nightmares. How many powerful figures who died of a sudden heart attack or stroke during the war were actually victims of this tactic? Were there specific poisons developed just for this purpose, and are their formulas still classified? And what kind of training and psychological conditioning would an agent have to go through to be able to look a man in the eyes, kiss him, and know that she was delivering his death? Did any of them ever falter at the final moment? Number 3. Could an entire operation be run from a brothel? Espionage is often called the world's second oldest profession. It was only a matter of time before someone combined it with the oldest. The honey trap for hire was a brutally pragmatic tactic that outsourced the work of seduction. Intelligence agencies would co-opt or create entire brothels and use the sex workers as an army of informal intelligence gatherers. This was not about a single glamorous agent, this was about volume. A well-placed brothel in a port city like Hamburg or Marseille or near a major military base would have a constant stream of potential sources: sailors, soldiers, supply officers, administrative staff. These men, far from home and seeking comfort and release, were often careless with their words. The operation, known in German intelligence as Salon Kitty, was a real and infamous example of this. The Sicherheitsdienst SD, the intelligence agency of the SS, took over a high-class brothel in Berlin. They staffed it with intelligent, well-educated women who were trained to elicit information from their clients, who included foreign diplomats, military attaches, and high-ranking German officials themselves. The entire building was bugged, with microphones hidden in the walls and under the beds. Every conversation was recorded and analyzed by an intelligence team in the basement. The women were not just passive listeners, they were trained to steer conversations towards specific topics. If the agency wanted to know about a new type of tank, the women would be instructed to ask their clients about their work, to praise their importance in the war effort, and to ask seemingly naive questions about the new toys they were working on. Men, eager to impress, would often boast and reveal far more than they should. This tactic was effective because it was a numbers game. Not every client would reveal a state secret, but out of hundreds of conversations, a few nuggets of valuable information would emerge. It was a form of mass surveillance, using human beings instead of technology as the censors. The women who worked in these establishments were in a precarious position. Some were coerced, forced into the work with threats against their families. Others were patriots, who saw it as their way of contributing to the war effort. Still others were simply professionals who were paid for their services, both sexual and informational. They were on the front lines of the secret war, but their contributions were never officially recognized. They lived in a dangerous gray area, trusted by neither their clients nor their spy masters. Allied intelligence services used similar, if less formally structured, methods. They would cultivate informants in bars and brothels in occupied territories. A sympathetic prostitute could overhear a German officer complaining about low morale in his unit, or learn the date of a planned troop movement. This information would be passed along to the local resistance or directly to Allied intelligence. It was dangerous work. If discovered, the woman would face torture and execution. This tactic reveals the cynical and unsentimental nature of wartime espionage. People were seen as assets. Their desires, their loneliness, their need for human connection, all were weaknesses to be exploited for intelligence gain. The brothel was not just a place of business, it was an information gathering factory. The unanswered questions are about the women themselves. What were their names? What did they discover? How many of them survived the war? Did any of them manage to use their position to play both sides, selling information to the highest bidder? And how many high-level officials had their careers quietly ended because of an indiscreet conversation recorded in one of these establishments, the official reason for their dismissal being something far less embarrassing? Number 2, how do you turn a hero into a traitor? Every intelligence agency had a list of people they desperately wanted on their side. These were the ungettable targets, the fiercely loyal enemy general, the patriotic government minister, the incorruptible security chief. Blackmail would not work. Money was an insult. Ideological conversion was impossible. For these targets, a special tactic was required, the recruitment by love or the long-con seduction. This was not about a brief affair to steal a document. This was about completely turning a target's allegiance, using love as the catalyst for treason. This was the most ambitious and psychologically complex of all honeypot operations. It could take years. The agent assigned to the mission had to be the agency's best. They had to be a perfect match for the target, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. The goal was to build a genuine, deep, and loving relationship, or at least what felt like one to the target. The agent would insinuate themselves into the target's life. They would become their confidant, their supporter, their one true ally in a stressful world. They would share their triumphs and their disappointments. They would become indispensable. The target, a person who likely lived a life of professional isolation and constant pressure, would come to depend on the agent for their emotional survival. Once the bond was unbreakable, the agent would begin the slow, careful process of turning them. They would not attack the target's patriotism directly. Instead, they would sow seeds of doubt. They would subtly highlight the injustices and incompetence of the target's own government. It's not fair that they treat you this way after all you've done, the agent might say. The people in charge are fools. They are leading this country to ruin. You could do so much better. The agent would create a narrative where the target's government was the true enemy of the people, and the target was the only one who could save them. The agent would present their own side, not as a foreign enemy, but as a potential ally in the target's righteous cause. The people I work with, the agent would confess. They see what you see. They believe you are the only one who can bring peace. They want to help you. The act of passing secrets was reframed. It was not treason. It was a noble act, a way of undermining a corrupt regime from within. The target was not betraying their country, they were saving it, and they were doing it for the person they loved, the only person who truly believed in them. This tactic was a form of psychological reprogramming. It exploited the target's ego, their frustrations, and their deepest emotional needs. The love they felt for the agent became the justification for their betrayal. The story of Mathilde Carré, a French resistance agent codenamed La Chatte, the cat, is a tragic example of how love and loyalty can become entangled. After being captured by the Germans, she was turned by an Abwehr officer. She fell in love with him and, as a result, betrayed her entire network, leading to the arrest and death of dozens of her former comrades. Her case is a stark reminder of how a powerful emotional connection could completely flip an agent's allegiance. An agent running this kind of operation was playing with fire. It was impossible to maintain such an intense, long-term relationship without the lines blurring. The constant emotional performance could lead to a breakdown, or worse, the agent could genuinely fall in love with the target. If that happened, the entire operation could collapse, or the agent might even go native and defect. This ultimate honeypot leaves the most profound questions. How many of history's great traders were motivated not by ideology or money, but by a secret, manipulative love affair? Were there major turning points in the war battles won or lost, campaigns that succeeded or failed, because a key general was being controlled by a lover who was an enemy spy? And what happened to these couples after the war? Did the agent simply disappear, leaving the target with the devastating knowledge that the great love of their life was a lie, and that it had cost them everything? Number 1. What if the target knew it was a trap all along? This is the most dangerous game of all. It is the world of the double cross, where nothing is as it seems. The final, most devious tactic is not about deceiving a naive target. It is about deploying a honeypot against a target who you know is a trained intelligence officer, a target who is expecting a trap. This is the willing victim gambit. In this scenario, an intelligence agency knows that their opponent is aware of their honeypot agent. Instead of pulling the agent out, they let the operation continue. The enemy officer, the target, believes they are in control. They think, I know she is a spy, I will pretend to fall for her, I will feed her false information and use her to deceive her own agency. This is exactly what the honeypot's agency wants them to think. The agent's real mission is not to seduce the target. Her real mission is to be a willing conduit for disinformation. The target believes he is playing her, but in reality, she is playing him. Let's say the Allies want the Axis powers to believe the invasion of Europe will happen at Calais, not Normandy. They would deploy a honeypot agent to get close to a senior German intelligence officer in, for example, Madrid. They would make sure the Germans knew who she was. The German officer, full of confidence, would begin an affair with her. He would let slip some genuine but minor pieces of intelligence to make her trust him. Then, he would start feeding her the main course carefully crafted secret documents and plans that all pointed to a massive buildup of forces opposite Calais. The agent, for her part, would play the role of the gullible seductress perfectly. She would pretend to be completely in love and unaware that she was being played. She would dutifully pass the false information back to her headquarters. Her handlers, who were in on the plan, would pretend to believe it. This created a feedback loop of deception. The German officer would see, through his own sources, that the Allies were acting on the information he was leaking, for example, by bombing targets near Calais. This would confirm to him that his deception was working and that the honeypot agent was a reliable channel. He would become more and more confident, feeding more and more of the Allied-created disinformation into his own intelligence system. He was so proud of himself for outsmarting the enemy's honeypot that he became the main tool of his own deception. This tactic was a core component of the massive deception campaign before D-Day, Operation Bodyguard. The Allies used a network of double agents known as the double-cross system to feed false information to the Germans. The agents like Garbo, Juan Pujol Garcia convinced the German high command that they were running a network of spies in Britain when in fact they were completely controlled by MI5. While not always honeypots, the principle was the same, letting the enemy think they are running an agent when, in fact, that agent is running them. A honeypot was the perfect vehicle for this because the ego and emotion involved in a romantic conquest made the target even more susceptible to believing he was the one in control. The agent in this role was the best of the best. They had to be a convincing actor on multiple levels. They had to fool the target, a trained professional, into believing they were a naive spy. It required nerves of steel and an incredible understanding of human psychology. One wrong move, one flicker of doubt in her eyes, and the target might realize the truth, and she would be killed. This is the ultimate expression of the War of Hearts and Secrets. It is a battle of wits, fought in bedrooms and hotel bars, where love is a weapon, trust is a liability, and the truth is the first casualty. It is a world where being caught in a honeypot trap might be the very thing that makes you most useful to your enemy. And it leaves us with the most dizzying question of all. In the great game of espionage, when a spy falls for another spy who is really seducing whom, how many operations that were thought to be successful honeypots for one side were actually brilliant, double crosses by the other? And is it possible that in some cases, both sides thought they were running the other, caught in a hall of mirrors from which there was no escape, their agents trapped in a romance where no one knew what was real and what was just part of the game?